Yeah, so it's the end of the day, so I don't want to have a typical talking at the audience. I want this to be very participatory because I'm sure you guys just have been burning to talk about things, whatever those things are. So let me just get my. Cool thing is if you use Keynote, you can use your phone or your watch for your remote. So, pro tip. Anyway, talking about data modeling is dead. Long live data modeling. About me, he already talked about that. That's me with a book, which I'll talk about in a second here. The motivations for this talk, really. So when I finished Fundamentals of Data Engineering, I felt a giant void in my life, namely Chapter 8 of the book. So Chapter 8 deals with queries, transformations, and data modeling. And I got a lot of questions from people. This will be really fun navigating this. I feel like so the questions came up like, well, why didn't you include this or that, or in your chapter? And I'm like, I don't know. I figured I covered the main things data engineers need to know. But I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, well, I think I covered a few things, the important stuff, but there's a lot more to it. And I also noticed that data modeling as a whole really isn't being practiced anymore. We talked a bit about this in the panel, right? So, I run a consultancy, and I meet with countless data teams at very big and very small and very medium-sized companies. And I think this is creating a lot of huge and very expensive problems. And so I think we continue to ignore data modeling much longer, it's sort of like a festering wound on your skin. It doesn't get better with time, and I feel like that's kind of where we are. The consequences are going to be very severe. I think if we keep on the same track we're on in another 10 years, as an industry, I'm actually very, very concerned. So why talk about this now? Who's heard of AI? Whose company is trying to do AI? You can silently nod at that. I know in the US, every company is trying to become an AI company right now. They're trying to have a ChatGPT API call or whatever. The rise of AI, though, it means that data is getting a fresh look, right? And I feel like, the data sets I've seen in many corporations, they're a mess. Who feels like their data sets are pristine? Didn't think so. So the question comes up. So AI is getting a lot of attention. Our corporate data sets suck, and we keep talking about adding value to the business, data quality, governance, data management, all the hygienic stuff that we know we should do, and we don't do them. So if we're not going to get our house in order now, when all the attention in the world is being paid on data, when are we ever going to do it? Right? I've never seen this much attention on data right now. But meanwhile, it's an absolute disaster. So we have a chance to fix this. And if not, my opinion is we should just shut up as an industry and recognize that our utility probably isn't that great, to be frank. So what we'll discuss? Well, what's a data model? Why data modeling is dead? And then why data modeling should live long or something. A data model, though. I'm going to make this kind of participatory. Let me just ask the audience, maybe I'll ask, what's a data model? Yes. Sorry, Mike, over. That's not a name, that's the thing.
That wasn't me. Is there a conceptual representation of information?
Right, yeah. Anyone else? I got one more, and we have to move because we only have 30 minutes. We're now 25 minutes. Anyone else? Take it? Fine. I got a couple that we can go with then. Who's heard of this book, Data and Reality? It came out in 1978. I think I was one at the time. William Kent, though, this is, so back in the day, computers were still new, and he was trying to represent, how do we represent data knowledge in computers? How are we trying to represent reality? I think this was one of the first stabs at defining data modeling, right? So I'll let you read this. There's actually two of them. So blink twice when you're done. Right, then later Steve Hoberman. He's very prolific. I consider him sort of the OG in the data modeling world. One's a wonderful publisher called Techniques Publishing, and he has a lot. His stack of authors, by the way. If you ever want great books in data modeling, just go straight to Techniques. They're amazing. And in fact, as a side note, because I know I have a lot of time here, Australia, of all places, there are a lot of heavyweights in data modeling here. I would wager to guess Australia actually might, pound for pound, be greater than the US in terms of data modeling prowess. We can talk about that over drinks later. But this is what Steve Hoverman defined data modeling as, right? A wayfinding tool. So notice what's not in these definitions. We're not talking about star schemas, relational, one big table. We're not talking about techniques, databases. We're talking about, as you pointed out, representing reality, right? Here's my lame definition that I'm using for my book right now. I say lame because it's not done. So, it organizes and standardizes data to facilitate believable and useful information and knowledge for humans and machines. The end machines part is interesting because we've actually been doing this for ages. I mean, that's literally how data processing works. But now you throw an AI into the mix, and I'm just sort of preempting the fact they might start knowing things at some point. But the believable is so believable and useful. It's an interesting one. So Bill Inman, he's become I think a really good mentor. And one day I asked him, what's his North Star, right? And it was really simple. It's first believable data, and then it's useful, i.e. it provides some sort of a value. Notice I didn't say correct, right? Correct and believable are not the same thing. And sometimes you don't need to be correct to be believable. Whose data is directionally correct in their business? I see a lot of chuckles. You don't have to raise your hands because it's a small community here, and but yeah. So anyway, this is the working definition for the new book. It should be out like Q1 of next year or something like that. It was supposed to be done, but a couple things got in my way. So data modeling is dead. Let's talk about this. Examples of problems, right? So thousands of DBT models run by one data team. Who has seen this happen? Yeah, and what happens with this? Do you feel like you have the cognitive ability to understand 1,000 DBT models?
No.
No? Okay, so just I want to get maybe somebody's experience. You can genericize it. You can totally lie about it too if you want. But this will be sort of the general thing going. You can talk about DBT or something else. Ad hoc, what I call query-driven modeling. So this is another extreme. We were just talking to a data team recently, and they get a lot of requests for answers. Does this happen to people? All right. Well, how does this often look? What happens? Right? Okay, great.
It feels like we pulling things from the swamp and trying to present in a dashboard or something.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, it could take the form to, it's a lot of stuff, right? Like I need an answer today, I need another answer, and pretty soon you have a bunch of answers, but you forgot the question. So this happens a lot, right? So WTF does the data mean? This is I think, a good example of data modeling today. It's you're not really sure of the data you have. And there's lots of reinventing the wheel, right? So I mean, techniques that have existed for a long time, and I would say pretty crappy techniques at that. We're constantly recycling these things, but I think it's at the expense of, as we were talking about in the panel, like the formal, discussion and also the knowledge of all the practices out there. So back to the basics, right? So you mentioned conceptual modeling. I think that's a good place to start here. This is the highest level. This is technology independent. This is really about understanding the data and the reality of your business and how data relates to it, right? How does information flow, and what are the rules and the vocabulary and the definitions and the processes? This is data modeling. If you understand this, you can translate it to a database, which we'll talk about in a bit. You can do logical stuff, which is translating the conceptual to a structure used in a data system. And then finally, physical. It's a physical implementation of your conceptual and logical, and optimized for your use case, right? We just had a great discussion about different databases. different use cases. That's physical modeling. All too often, data modeling nowadays starts and ends at the physical level. We're optimizing for problems before I understand the question being asked. Does this resonate with anybody? Yeah? So, and it's tempting to do so. You have, storage is cheap, compute's powerful. So why not just throw all your resources at the data? The problem is you don't know what you're doing because you don't understand the data that you're modeling and that you're doing all these, storing and transformations and queries to. So here's an example of the word model. I think this is an overused, overloaded term now. I was talking, was it last week in Salt Lake City, where I live? We were talking about models, right? So, and somebody was really confused. There was a data scientist, and he's like, well, I use a TensorFlow model, right? But that's not the same thing as a relational model. This isn't the same thing as a star schema, right? But I think the word model is interesting because it's getting overloaded. So my coach, actually, my fitness coach, she is also a data analyst, and she was telling me about her data modeling. And it was funny, because I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And she's like, well, I'm making DBT models, right? So this is where we are. Even the word modeling isn't understood. It could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Other examples is streaming events. As far as I can tell, there's no formal modeling practice with events right now. It's something I've been digging into. Schema on read, right? So ad hoc and federated queries. This is pretty popular these days. And anything under the sun, really, right? So, but as I say, a lack of a model is still a model. It's just a crappy model. And we have a lot of crappy models right now. And the trends aren't looking good. So if we look at Google for data modeling, this is, I think, as far back as it goes, but you can kind of see interest over time. Not great. But let's look at maybe different techniques, right? So maybe relational or dimensional. Maybe that's killing it. Absolutely not. Not at all. So I wrote an article recently, and I said, what if we just burn it all down, actually? What if we just forget about this stuff? Like it never happened and we move on? Would anyone want to do that? And if not, why? This is actually an open question for 2 minutes. Why wouldn't you want to burn it all down to the ground? As far as the interest goes, it already has. Well, you can talk about it over drinks, or you have your hand up very quickly. Run, Simon, run. Okay. Clock's ticking.
I think for the time it was introduced, especially early days in the data warehouse, the use of that as the cornerstone for a lot of business analytics and sort of KPIs has now sort of been well and truly established in businesses. So at a minimum, there's a expectation from businesses that they'll continue to receive their standard reporting and insights, which will continue to at least require some level of, dimensional sort of modeling. And then I think, I think that's not going to disappear because that's now well and truly established. So.
Right. So let's look at what happened real quick. I think we went through a few of these ideas in the panel here. Ryan, I think, has a good history, actually, of things that happened along the way. Large data systems came about, like BigQuery, what he called Easy Query, and it just made things really easy, right? So now you don't have to be rigorous because you're not constrained. You can just throw any amount of compute at it, and that's actually pretty awesome, right? Agile. I blame Agile for a lot of things. So. You chuckle. The Agile Manifesto was incidentally signed not too far from my house in Salt Lake City. What was it? A while ago at this point. But I think there's a lot of Agile cargo culting. And what it means is, we gotta move fast. We don't have time. So what I often see Agile being mistaken for is we have to move fast for sprints. But if you have to move in, like, say, 2-week sprints, how do you have time to think? Right? And especially in data, I think there's arguments for and against the use of Agile. But often data teams, they're trying to copy what software teams are doing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But data is one of these things where I feel like it's a thinking person's sport too, right? And we sort of eschewed that. We sort of thrown it away because we have to be agile now. As I talked about earlier on the spectrum of fast and formal, fast won. I think that's unequivocally true. We wouldn't be having this discussion otherwise. Also, data exploded, right? So there's different ways of storing it, different ways of retrieving it. You're no longer in a world of rows and columns. You have nested, you have unstructured data like images, audio, text, whatever. Couple this with a lot of hype, like data is the new oil. Data science is the sexiest job of the 21st century. So there's a lot of attention paid on data. And what do you think is going to happen, right? That amount of money and attention on data means you're going to have to move really fast. And also the dev and data divide. Who has seen the developer and data divide? Let me show you a picture of what that looks like. So I guess this resonates with people, right? How do you feel when you see this? Do you feel awesome? Do you feel like you're on the receiving end of like a giant shitstorm? Yeah, or what do they call them here? A typhoon or something? But that's the reality of it. It goes one way, and I'm going to talk about this in a bit. But so data is interesting because I actually think the bigger culprits with the lack of data modeling is actually software engineering and developers. If you think it's bad with us, shift left and look at the. Chad gave a great talk on data contracts, right? This is precisely what we're talking about. Quality issues always start upstream. The best you can do if you get crappy data is you can duct tape it. You can try some like lame plumbing technique on it, to use the analogy here, but that's the best you can do. So we'll talk more about this in a bit, but this is the reality. What are the consequences? Well, there's the fragmentation and balkanization of data across the data lifecycle. Data loses accuracy and coherence and believability after a while. Data does have entropy. There's what you think your data is, and there's the reality of your data in the business, right? And these things drift apart over time. This is inevitable. The rise of AI, especially with hallucinations, means the rise of bullshit, right? And yet, we hobble along and we treat the symptoms. Again, back to this. Data teams treat the symptoms, right? Instead of shifting left and working with dev to fix your problems, we're like, oh, well, we'll have data quality observability, or we'll have this, that, or the other thing. And I think this is great. It does not address the root cause. We're really good at treating symptoms as a data industry. I think root cause is something we should get better at. That's the other thing I should have mentioned in the panel where we should focus. So long live data modeling. So what can we do? I have 10 minutes left. Ideally, you want to make data modeling a core practice. This is going to be like way easier to say and very hard to do. Bring back conceptual and logical modeling. I feel like these techniques have been lost to an entire generation of practitioners, and we need to start educating people. There's also the notion of data modeling patterns. Who's heard of the data model resource book? So back in the day, the 1700s or something like that, that was more like there's the late 90s and 2000s to be realistic, but there was a whole series of books that came out on conceptual modeling patterns. Like how do you describe a retailer, for example, right? From a top level, not tables or anything, but just how do you think about how a retailer works and is in business? They have customers, they have orders, they have products. I would say start from these. These models are still extremely relevant to any business. They describe banks. There's 2,000 pages of this stuff. Actually, one of your Australian mates, John Giles from Melbourne, or lives outside of there, like he advocates this a lot. He basically, somebody asked him to come up with a data model, and they gave him a month, and he did it in 8 hours using these patterns. And it worked. He's got a really good book, by the way, called The Nimble Elephant, if you're interested in that. I consider him to be sort of a Yoda figure in the world. So again, model across the data lifecycle. We'll talk about in a bit. Stop the stupid and petty religious wars in data modeling. I feel one of the things that's holding us back as an industry is this feeling that your way is right and everyone else sucks. And then finally, what I jokingly call MMA, mixed model arts. Let's get into it. Got some time. So make data modeling a core practice. Again, this is going to be easier said than done, but I think acknowledging the fact that we should data model is the first step towards making it happen. The biggest gap I see in the industry right now has nothing to do with technologies, as we were talking about earlier. It has everything to do with a lack of knowledge and skills. We have no shortage of great tools. We're pretty clueless at using them to the full capability. We can talk about this over drinks, but I believe this to be very true. And data modeling is a core practice we need to bring back. So I think just even having a discussion, you're all here. You obviously have an interest in it. But at least recognizing that this is something we need to bring back as the first step. We'll talk more about how this happens in a bit. Bring back conceptual and logical modeling. So we need to get out of the notion of thinking about data modeling as only a physical implementation of a model. This is another destructive behavior. We need to think about how does our data relate to the business? How does data flow? What's the impact? And how do various relationships in the business work with relation to data? Who here can say that their data accurately represents how their business works? That's right. Yeah, exactly. Again, it's interesting because we call ourselves, data professionals, and we're supposed to be data driven. I think we're the farthest thing from it. We don't know what's going on. How do you know what's going on, right? Conceptual and logical modeling practices are a way to get back there. It teaches you to see the business, not just react and dump data into a database and query it, which is what we do right now. That's great, except it also means you don't know what you're doing, literally. Use patterns, we talked about that. But again, established patterns have been around for a long time. I would say this gives you another lens to see the universe of your business and how data relates to it. So again, like I said, a really good book. They might be, they're a bit old, but I think they're still relevant. I recently read them. But again, Data Model Resource Books, Volume 1 through 3. Nimble Elephant are great books to start with. I think the use of patterns is one of those things I think is going to be resurrected soon. There was a lot of work that went into this and a lot of brain power. Now we're just rediscovering it, like we are with a lot of things in modeling. Model across the data life cycle. And so Chad, talked about shifting left when he talked about producers and consumers. We have to think about data. The moment you can get data right is when you create it. Everything else after that is reaction. So we have to think about, conception to death, I guess, and life cycle. But that's sort of the. Shut up. Sorry, Siri wanted to talk to me. So modeling is one of these things because I think all too often, especially in our industry, we think in terms of Kimball, star schema, and we're so focused on our narrow subset of the universe that we fail to understand the data modeling that should happen over here. The data modeling should happen over here. We're missing, the techniques, for example, right? The last thing that was really the last big evolution was published in 2000, I believe, with Data Vault. Since then, and we're still talking about all this stuff. We've had NoSQL databases, endless types of databases. We have machine learning, we have streaming. Why aren't we talking about how to model these things too? Right? So I think we're sort of on Groundhog Day with a lot of stuff. And we fail to recognize that data has a life cycle. So we need to think bigger, end to end. So again, this is a reality today. Think about shifting left and right. So collaborate. I think data contracts are a good first step. And I think a great mechanism to make this work. But really understand. Work with the teams that are your upstream stakeholders and your downstream consumers. This is going to be more important, I would say, as data becomes real time and streaming. I think streaming is going to act as a forcing function for a lot of things. Right now, because we operate in batch mode, you have plenty of time to react. And React is something we do really well. But the moment that there's a feedback loop, it's very tight and preferably goes back to the application developers. Well, now you're in a different situation, right? So we talk about data products. This is essentially what it is. It's data operating in a continuous feedback loop. With a very short time window if you're talking about streaming. So that's another aspect of it. Stop the stupid and petty infighting in the data modeling world. So there's, I think, no shortage of opinions, and I would dare say cults in the data modeling community that feel that their way is the right way. I think this is, it's just stupid and it needs to stop. I can tell you plenty of examples over drinks. So, mixed model arts. This is something that friend of mine jokingly came up with. But who recognizes this guy? Yep. Right, so I think Bruce Lee was the first true mixed martial artist. He came up with Jeet Kune Do back in the day, and he started studying various styles. And this is where I think we need to go as a profession is, it's not just about understanding one way, right? Like a star schema, for example. That's great. But you should know the arsenal of techniques for data modeling across the data lifecycle. And this is what I call mixed martial arts. So, because there is no one true way, right? There are many ways, and you know what works best for your situation. Again, numerous databases as well that we talked about. You need to know that the techniques that work for the technologies you have at hand and be able to think up and down, conceptual to logical to physical, right? And bridge the gaps. You have to think, you have to think out and think up, I suppose, to borrow the scale up and scale out analogy. So in conclusion, we're at a critical point as an industry. I think if we can't get this right, I don't know when we're going to. I don't think I want to contemplate the consequences, but I think you can see what's happening. Data modeling is key to making, quote, data and AI work. But we need to adopt what's worked and modernize and innovate for what's needed. And then again, you can be part of the change, all of you. So thank you. You can add me on LinkedIn there. That's my Substack. Grab that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Joe. That was awesome.
It was something.
It was something.
I think I have time for a question or two. Otherwise,
we can do a couple of questions. If anyone wants to ask Joe something about, well, preferably the presentation, but it could be.
You can ask about whatever you want. I don't care.
No? Anyone? They just want prizes. Oh, there's one. Gotcha.
Hi. So, just some background. So I've done 3NF modeling, Inman, star schema, Kimball, and then Hadoop happened. So one big table. My question is, like most enterprises are now kind of in a migration kind of phase, moving into cloud platforms or what have you. That's why all these things are kind of, coming back up. What's your take on one big table? One big table in the sense that there are use cases when it's really strong for single specific use case, and you just chuck in all the data towards the end as you go through the process. But from a holistic standpoint, one big table is a modeling technique. What's your take on that?
I think here's the deal.
Would you even call it a modeling technique?
Well, it is. I mean, as I said, a lack of a model is still a crappy model. But I think it's a fine technique, right? And so the new book I'm writing, I think it's showing you the different techniques across the data lifecycle, and I think showing you the trade-offs of that. So one big table is nice because it's easy. It sucks for a lot of reasons, right? So you run the risk of duplicate data. You run the risk of like a table swamp, right? So just made that up right now. So I think as long as you understand the trade-offs and what you're getting yourself into, I don't really care what you do. That's the whole point. That's mixed martial arts. In mixed martial arts, you're using the fighting technique that works for your situation. You're not going to try and box somebody when you're on the ground on your back. And it's the same thing with techniques like one big table. It's certainly appropriate as long as you understand the trade-offs and the various other techniques and your options you could use, right? So I think it's a fine technique for some cases. I think it's a really bad idea for a lot of cases too. But because what is it? At best, you're first normal form. At worst, you're no normal form, right? So what happens when you have no normal form? Well, the trade-off is that you have redundancies in your data, right? And so as we talk about, even though it's cheap as hell to store it, your data sucks. You try and query that. Now you're managing over stuff. Now you're treating the symptoms, right? So that's a trade-off. So I think we're actually out of time now. I want to be respectful of the guy in the flashing orange, red jacket there. So
hard to miss. All right. Thanks very much, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.